Hi friends, it's Annie Grace, author of This Naked Mind, and I am answering readers' questions. This question I have put a lot of thought into because I did not want to answer it without a significant amount of thought because of how important it is. Equally, I think this answer will probably be iterative because I can't claim to know everything. I certainly don't. So this is kind of my first stab, but I'd love people's comments and suggestions, things you've done, things you've worked, and together, iterate on this because this is such an important conversation. So the question today is from Carly, and she said, I would love some suggestions on how to talk to our kids about drinking and how brainwashed our society is about drinking and at what age to start those conversations. So we know that the campaign in the 80s, Nancy Reagan's campaign, Just Say No, had practically no effect. And if we look at why it had no effect, I think that it wasn't practical enough, it wasn't thoughtful enough, it didn't take into consideration the reality of what kids are dealing with and going through today, and it certainly didn't leave room for questions. And so in my response to this answer, I just kind of started brainstorming a list of do's and don'ts. And like I said, I think this will be iterative. By no means do I think it's conclusive or complete, but I think it's a place to start this conversation. And I obviously thought about it in terms of how I will be speaking to my kids about alcohol. They are 4 and 7, so I think they're a little bit young, but as soon as probably 9 or 10, I will absolutely be talking to them about alcohol. So here's my list. Number 1 is do it. Definitely do it. Don't put it off. And I think that's the most important thing. Any conversation you have is better than no conversation. Do be realistic. Accept that we live in this culture and explore that with your kids. Saying just say no is not realistic and it's not effective. So I think being realistic is a really important part of the conversation. Do talk about your personal stories and your personal struggles, both what you've experienced and what you've observed with other people, because real life stories is key and crucial and very important. Do tell them about the long-term effect that alcohol can have on some people and even use examples. And I would almost do this in a way that, really is asking them what they've observed first or what they think about alcohol and getting kind of a baseline for where they're at before kind of diving in to make sure that they have a balanced perspective, because that's really what you want here, is for them to not just be ingesting society's kind of propaganda around it, but also have the very balanced perspective around alcohol and alcohol addiction. Do, of course, let you know that you love them no matter what, and that's the foundation of this open, honest conversation, and that's what grows open and honest conversation. And I would say, let them in on a few secrets of how life works and how society works and how marketing works. And by doing so, I think you can teach them to be really critical and conscious and aware. Teach them to look very critically at advertisements and maybe even look at a few together and say, what is this advertisement for beer really selling? And do you think it's realistic for you to get that from beer? And teach them to be critical. Teach them to be critical about how far-fetched the claims are in alcohol advertisement. And teach them to ask the question of, why do you think they have to make such far-fetched claims? It's because there's a lot of negatives that they're kind of covering up in alcohol advertising. Tell them that outside of the US, especially in the UK, it's not even legal to advertise alcohol on TV. So many people die of alcohol every year. It's 4 times the amount of people who die from drug overdoses, both prescription and illegal combined, and they can't even advertise it. So, if you explain that you wouldn't want them to see an advertisement of somebody pulling out cocaine, equally seeing an advertisement of alcohol can be really confusing because it is so dangerous. Talk to them about the idea of self-fulfillment and entitlement. I mean, the truth is that we live in this society where money, and we're richer than any other time in the history of the world, and we have more things and more stuff, and yet we feel completely entitled and completely unfulfilled by a large part. And by exposing that and just having an honest conversation about that fact, you can show that there are so many things in the alcohol advertisements. Alcohol is actually positioned by marketers as one of the vital things that's going to make us feel more fulfilled. And, just by having that critical conversation, you're teaching them how to critically think about this anyway. And then importantly, and I'm sure you're doing this anyway, but we're never going to find those things outside of ourselves. We are on this hamster wheel of the next thing, the next promotion, the next job, the next degree. As soon as I graduate, as soon as I get my driver's license, then I'll be happy. The sooner you can, show and teach somebody that those things that they're chasing are never going to end up in happiness, I think that we learn that no one has it all figured out. There's nobody that's, perfectly, completely everything sorted, and we're all just learning as we go. And being really honest about this with your kids can really help, because a lot of the reason that we drink in the first place, especially at a young age, is because we're chasing something and think it's going to lead to some sort of happiness or fulfillment that we don't feel. And I would say do also think hard about how you plan to answer certain questions, because kids, and especially teenagers, they have this uncanny ability to tell when you're honest and when you're transparent and when you're not. And think hard about it, but don't let that be a barrier or an excuse to put it off, because actually the most important action is taking action. And then, give them this really cool foundational guideline about alcohol. Talk to them about the fact that right now at this point in their life, they don't need alcohol to relax. They don't need alcohol to have a good time. And ask them to really remember that, because if there ever comes a time where they feel like they need a drink to have a good time, it's not that what's changed is alcohol and its addictive qualities. And their capacity to really enjoy life right now without alcohol is something that should be showed to them and cherished, so that if and when they drink, because the truth is they probably will. I mean, that's the realistic part of this conversation. If alcohol starts to sink its teeth into them and they become addicted and dependent on it, to where the alcohol is creating a need for alcohol, and suddenly they don't believe they can have a good time without it, that could be a really big wake-up call for them. Oh, wait, I remember I didn't used to need this. And kind of cementing that in their minds now, I think, is a really important thing. So here's a few don'ts. Don't pretend to have all the answers. We think our job as parents sometimes is to know everything, and it's not. And, this is a chance to learn together. You don't know why something so harmful and addictive is held up as so important in our society. I don't know why that's true. That's okay. We don't know. We don't understand why society has the relationship with alcohol that it does. It doesn't make sense once you see the truth about alcohol, and especially once you've lived through the pain of addiction to alcohol. So teach them to critically ask these questions together. Don't put the conversation off. You have the chance right now. Now you're an influence in their life, and don't put it off. Don't put it off because of your own personal decisions. So don't be afraid to talk to them, even if you drink. Your actions, of course, they're always going to carry more weight than your words. But without your words, your actions are all they're ever going to see. So your actions and your words together are so powerful, but don't forget your words no matter what you're doing. A parent's vulnerability to a child is such a powerful thing. It is incredibly powerful and persuasive and motivating for that child to take a harder, more critical look. I would say don't be afraid to cause them a bit of fear. And I know we hate to see our children be uncomfortable. We hate to see them confront the realities of life, but letting them know the realities about drinking and driving. There's a really powerful commercial on this that came out from the Australian government. It's about 5 minutes long. And, if your child is in their upper teens, I would really recommend them watching it. Tony Robbins, he says, the way that he made sure that his kids never drank and did drugs is when they were teenagers, he actually took them to see the repercussions of this. And he took them into some very, crack houses, if you will. And they experienced viscerally the horror and the pain. And then they just naturally stayed away from it because they knew without a doubt they didn't want to end up there. And in our culture, we so protect our children that we almost do them a disservice sometimes, because we're so afraid of letting them see the pain that they end up experiencing it. So, letting them watch that commercial on drunk driving, I'll find it and I'll post it in the link below. It's definitely intense, but again, it's important. your conversation with them about alcohol and suicide, and how 70% of suicides involve alcohol at the time, and alcohol and depression, and how alcohol can actually release a chemical that steals their ability to be happy, and alcohol and date rape, how 51% of women who go to college are have had some sort of sexual assault, and that statistic is higher than ever before, and the statistics about drinking in college are higher than ever before, and the correlation is higher than ever before. And it's not just the women. There was a man, and he was convicted of sexual assault, and he said, I would have never done this. I would have never done this. We were just friends. We were just hanging out, and then I drank too much. And he made a mistake. You don't want your son to end up being a rapist, and telling him about how careful he needs to be once he's intoxicated and no longer has control of those faculties. Those are hard conversations. They're horrible conversations, but the conversation is so much less horrible than the reality if that happens to a really, really good kid. So don't be afraid, and this is my last one, to ask them about how your drinking affects them. And this is really important. And if you've stopped drinking, you can ask them about how it affected them before. If you still drink, you can ask them about how it affects them now. And that's because this leads to an honest and effective conversation. Those are the types of the conversations that work, where you connect person to person, or where you learn something together, where you teach each other together, and not where you pretend to be perfect or have all the answers. And even if it sucks, even if it hurts, that's where the healing is. That's where you can understand, and that's the reality. And if your drinking is affecting them, that will teach you both a lesson, a very, very powerful and important lesson. Allowing them to process these feelings, to open this honest conversation with you without pretending you know all the answers, and certainly without pretending that you're perfect, and with the aim of teaching them to think critically about everything that's happening in our society, I think could lead to some really productive conversation. So a very intense topic. Like I said, I think I will continue to think on this and iterate. And if you have any suggestions, if anybody's out there talking to their kids or have stuff that works or doesn't work, I think we could benefit from a conversation about this in the comments. And thank you, Carly, for this question. I think it's a really important one. So again, this is Annie Grace, author of This Naked Mind.